Hey guys, Marc Millan here, excited to connect with you today. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about spontaneous worship and prophetic worship. Now, this idea of prophetic worship has grown a lot, I would say, over the last 8 to 10 years. I started in worship somewhere around 15 years ago, and when I started 15 years ago, this is not a topic we talked about very much. But over the last 8 to 10 years, I've heard a lot about it. I studied under someone who really understood it a lot more than I did, and over the years, I feel like the Lord has helped me be around environments whereas I was not only to see it, but to experiment in it, learn practicing it, and really gain I think, maybe some clarity on it. So this video is just about maybe giving some language to what I think about spontaneous worship and prophetic worship. I do, and this is just a personal position, I do believe there's a slight difference between spontaneous worship and prophetic worship. Now, depending on your journey and your church background, where you grew up in church, the idea of something prophetic might sound a little bit weird or strange. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I'm unsure, but I will tell you that prophecy is something that Paul talked about in the New Testament. Not only that, but when you look at the book of Revelation, it talks about the power of our testimony, which is the prophecy of proclaiming Jesus Christ. So I want to break it up for you just a little bit in how I have it in my mind. Okay, so spontaneous worship, I would consider spontaneous worship to be something that's in the moment. So you're leading a song, you're leading people in a song, and you just start to sing from a new place, maybe over the existing melody, maybe over the existing chord structure, but now you've kind of gone from what was written in the verses or in the bridge, and now you just start singing something that's not written in that song, but it's something that comes to you in that moment. When I've been in a moment of spontaneous worship, sometimes it's a combination of private worship that I had at a different time of the week, or maybe in another worship service, and in that moment I kind of feel these words rising up in my mind, and they just start to make sense to me, and I just start to sing them in that moment. Another way I would categorize spontaneous worship is you are finishing a song and you're just staying in the moment a little bit, and you're allowing your heart of thankfulness and praise to just say something a little bit longer after the song has finished. This is something I practice with our teams all the time. We talk about staying in the moment, not just going from song to song, but staying in the moment to just make sure, is there anything else that can be said here? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't, and that's perfectly fine. So that's kind of how I would categorize spontaneous worship. It's something that happens in the moment. It's something that comes from your own heart. It comes from your time with the Lord in the secret place, when you're just by yourself and you're either in prayer, or sometimes I'll take my guitar and I will just minister to God by myself and just start singing songs of melody. It could be a song that I'm rehearsing for, but I try to take myself into a new place to connect with God first, and those little times deposit something in me. So when I'm in those moments of praise and worship, and there's margin, time, basically, to go from this song to that song, I'll just sit in those moments a little bit, and sometimes spontaneous worship can happen in that environment. Okay, so spontaneous worship. Now let's talk about prophetic worship. This one probably is a little bit more of a mystery, or a little bit harder to clarify. So I want to make a few things that seem clear to me and pass them on to you. First of all, prophetic, I see that as declaring something that God is saying in the moment right now. Whereas spontaneous praise and worship to me is a moment of thankfulness and praise, and I'm just staying in the moment, and it's something that's coming up from inside of me towards God, and it's just in the moment. That's spontaneous worship. Prophetic worship to me is something I'm receiving as God singing in the moment. I don't want to make it too mysterious or complicated. Sometimes it can be a combination of another song with the song I'm actually singing. So there have been times where I've been singing a song in a particular key, and there's another song I've sang at another worship service or in another time, maybe in an older season of worship, and that melody seems to just kind of land right in that moment. And I feel this kind of prompting from God's Spirit to just start singing that over the room. That's one way it's happened, okay? Another way that's happened in a prophetic moment is I start to make up words that feel like a declaration of faith. I am trying to inspire faith into the room. Maybe through melody, I'm trying to say your walk has been hard, but God will be with you. And I'm trying to sing that into the room. I feel like God is telling me something, and He's using me to communicate that in that moment. So for me, prophetic worship is really about God saying something that starts to make sense to me, and I start to, by faith, declare that into the room while I'm leading worship. Does that make sense? So spontaneous worship or spontaneous praise is, I'm not just gonna sing this song and whatever on the page, we're just gonna leave it there. That's not bad. Sometimes I do that all the time, and I'm discerning, okay, we've sung that song, let's go to the next one. But sometimes we get to that and you feel the temperature of the room changing and you just want to stay in it a little bit longer. I'll say it this way, sometimes spontaneous worship, which is me just worshiping God, or sometimes I'll tell my team to begin doing it, sometimes I'll invite the congregation to do it, sometimes that can lead to a moment that we go back to, and now when we go back into a moment, a prophetic melody can hit the room, and I like to get it to a place where it becomes like a hook, which is a term we use in songwriting. A hook is something that everybody can get language on. So I try to work on simplifying the idea so that people can declare it together. And there are churches and there's worship teams that you and I both love to listen to and follow that do an incredible job with this. Bethel, probably the most known for their prophetic worship movement. And so that's how I kind of interchangeably think of both. And I'm always trying to leave room for one or the other. But I want to leave you with this thought. Both of them, spontaneous worship and prophetic worship, will require personal time from you. You will have to spend time in God's presence. You will have to spend time singing to the Lord. You will have to get way past the song's memory. You have to memorize all the thing of the song, and you got to get that thing so deep in you that you can launch into something. You just start swimming into deeper waters. It's a term I use. I'm swimming in deeper waters. So I'm fishing deeper into those waters. I'm trying to find something that I haven't found before. And you can either do it out of thanksgiving and praise, which is just a moment of spontaneous worship, which is something that every believer should know to do. And then hopefully it leads to prophetic worship, something that God can only say in that moment. I never try to force it, but I never try to repeat it either, because I want God to be the one who's leading me. Ultimately, it takes faith. You just gotta believe that God's the one leading you to do that. And when you do spontaneous worship, you're doing it out of faith too, because you're trying to stir other people up, or you're trying to lead other people so that their faith is stirred up when they're singing. And then in prophetic worship, you're really trying to declare something that you believe God is saying. And I haven't gotten it right all the time, but you got to practice it. And sometimes it doesn't rhyme, so I'll give you encouragement. Take that burden off your shoulders. Sometimes it's not going to rhyme. There's been times I've said stuff that didn't make sense, like I just flubbed my words. But if you practice it enough, you'll get a little bit more familiar with it. And I believe then God will start to entrust you with a little bit more. So spontaneous worship, prophetic worship, either way, worship is unto God. And I pray that God's Holy Spirit would lead you every time you're leading worship. Until next time, let's stay connected.